Hello and welcome to the Versa Creative Podcast. My name is Tony Martinez, and I'm an SEO specialist at Versa Creative and our podcast host. Versa Creative is an award-winning marketing and advertising agency dedicated to empowering brands with result-driven strategies. The Versa Creative Podcast is our place to have a discussion on the marketing industry, marketing trends, and most importantly, provide insights to our listener from our experts. On today's episode of the podcast, I have the pleasure of speaking with Amie Geistman, Versa Creative Strategic Storyteller. Thank you for being here today, Amie.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
I'm so excited to have you here today, Amie, because we're going to talk about rebranding, and what a great opportunity to speak with you. When people think of a company's brand, they likely think immediately about the company's name and logo, but in reality, a company's brand is much more than that. A brand carries some emotional value to it, as well as like a history with it from past, present, and future customers, even employees. Because of all this, a rebrand might seem like a negative thing to a lot of people, but rebranding can actually be necessary for some companies and have benefits. So in your own words, Amie, how would you define a rebrand?
So when I think about rebranding, I think it's all about public perception. It's kind of this process of taking your marketing strategy and adjusting it to shift how your audience is perceiving your brand identity.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time rebrand might seem like a pretty complicated thing, but sometimes it might be something simple like just updating your company's logo, your company's color scheme, things like that, just to maybe modernize your brand. But that's not to say that, like you kind of mentioned, it can't be a complete top to bottom refresh.
Right. Sometimes you'll need to go in and do a full overhaul that involves kind of reshaping your core values and your mission statement, kind of those foundational elements that you build your brand on. But yeah, you're right. Sometimes it is as simple as maybe just changing a couple things in your logo design, or shifting your messaging, or even updating your target audience to kind of meet where you're trying to go in the market.
Yeah, a lot of the time it just has to do with like updating your future goals or modernizing yourself for the current market. Again, as we've seen in the past year or so, the pandemic has impacted a lot of businesses and has shifted a lot of business models. So rebranding is a really big part of the conversation, I think, for all businesses, especially as they adapt.
Right.
So my next question is, what are some reasons why a company should be considering rebranding?
So the reasons why a company might rebrand are wide and many, but a couple are maybe your brand name is no longer aligned with your vision, or your products and services that you're offering. Another reason why companies might want to rebrand is just that their look and feel is visually dated. That can have a big impact on the public perception of your credibility. And so kind of updating that will help the public see you as an industry leader rather than kind of lagging behind.
Yeah, from the external perspective, I think like you mentioned, updating your name to reflect new offerings and maybe new areas that you service can be quite impactful. So like, for example, if you're a roofing company in Texas, but all of a sudden maybe you're servicing Arizona, Oklahoma, and let's say your business name is Texas Roofing, that might no longer be the best name for you since, like I said, now you're servicing Oklahoma, New Mexico, places like that. So it might be time to go from Texas Roofing to America Roofing, or whatever matches your future goals. Things like that I think can be really helpful for rebranding. And again, that might just be a change in name, but it can be pretty involved because that would likely involve updating your website, business cards, and all of your things like that.
Definitely. Changing your name is really an involved sort of rebrand, right? You're going to have to change lots of assets, but like you said, it can be really impactful. And I think that I think a really good example of a company that's rebranded and changed its name to kind of better reflect its service offerings is Dunkin' Donuts, right? Used to be called Dunkin' Donuts. They had a coffee cup in their logo, and now it's just called Dunkin', because they do so much more than just donuts, right? They're kind of like shifting towards this specialty coffee, kind of doing what Starbucks is doing. So they want to take donuts away from the main focus and now their name is more simple, their logo is cleaner. So even changing the name can have an effect on the visual presentation of the brand.
Yeah, another big reason why companies would rebrand is, again, standing out from competitors. Maybe not so much for Dunkin' Donuts since they're a big brand name, but I think this might apply to like maybe smaller businesses or even those who are in crowded industries. Updating your branding can help you stand out. Again, going back to like the roofing example, if your competitors are also Texas Roofing or something like that, you might want to change it to Texas Contractors or whatever helps you stand out and maybe get more customers, draw them in. What other reasons would companies be looking into rebranding, Amie?
Another reason companies might consider rebranding is there might be a negative audience perception associated with the brand, right? And updating the look isn't going to change what has happened and why customers might feel the way that they do, but it can show that a company's kind of trying to put their best foot forward and taking a step in the right direction and saying, we hear what you're saying and here's how we're adapting to meet what you expect out of us.
Interesting enough, this isn't something we haven't touched on so far, but updating to like respond to like bad perceptions and things like that, it would go beyond updating your like company name and logo. That would be more of an internal review in which you decide to update your company's mission, values, your objectives, and you have to communicate that to your customers just so that they're all on the same page that your company is shifting and moving forward. Another reason why companies might be rebranding is kind of something you mentioned earlier, outdated images. I think a lot of this happens to like companies in more professional and maybe like that business to business side where maybe their websites aren't getting a lot of traffic and they're really just driving traffic from industry insiders in their very niche markets. But on a recent podcast with our web developers, we talked about how even those websites need to be up to date. You can tell when a website hasn't been modernized or isn't designed for mobile and things like that. And it can really leave some companies behind. What are your thoughts on that, Amie?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that poor web design and outdated web design really has a lot bigger of an effect on like lead generation and developing new business than business owners in these B2B spheres really understand. People from older generations in these positions that have not yet realized that maybe we're shifting towards this web-based way of reaching consumers, that it used to be a lot of cold calling and reaching out that way, but now consumers in general are empowered through SEO really to kind of find what they're looking for. And if they search for a company and land on a website and see that it looks like it hasn't been updated since 2002, well, me personally, I'm gonna hit the back button and I'm gonna see what else is out there because they don't look like they're in the modern age.
Yeah, I agree. I think it also comes down to like on a more technical aspect for search engine visibility, outdated websites tend to be slower, tend to maybe not rank as well as like modern websites that are focusing on that user experience with their web design, page speed, things like that. So now that we've discussed why some companies need to rebrand or why they should consider rebrand, let's talk about the benefits that rebranding can have. Some of them are pretty obvious, like the being in a bad position and maybe updating your mission. That can obviously impact your customers going forward. But what are some other benefits that rebrands can have?
An often unrealized benefit of rebranding is bringing in more quality talent, right? And that I think deals more if when you're doing those full scale rebrands where you're looking at your internal values and guiding principles and kind of repositioning those just the same way that consumers are shopping brands, employees are doing the same thing, right? So kind of creating the image that you want to see reflected in the people that you hire can be a really positive benefit of rebranding.
Yeah, I think that's a very pertinent to today. As we all know, everyone's on LinkedIn professionally. So we see what companies share on LinkedIn. We see what their values are on LinkedIn. And that type of stuff is available to employees and future employees and people on the job market. So communicating that can definitely draw in new talent and more talented people that match your vision and your company's objectives. Any other benefits that you want to talk about, Amie?
I think another benefit is if you update your brand to be more modern, you can update it to be more impactful, more easily recognizable, and building that brand recognition is really important because that's the first step to building brand loyalty.
Yeah, I think nowadays, because we have so many brands available to us, we like to choose brands that we identify with and brands that carry more meaning to them, whether that's value, longevity, whatever a brand means to us. It's like you said, it's something that you connect to and that over time you stick with. You develop that brand loyalty, whether it's clothing, accessories, things like that. You develop brand loyalty and you know places that work for you, places that have given you good experiences, and you carry that with you and you communicate that. You might communicate that online, you might communicate that with friends. But again, that's a part of a company's brand, their customers' perception and their customers' experiences. Another benefit that I think we should bring up is, and something we kind of mentioned earlier, a rebrand can help you stand out from your competitors, especially if it's a really good one, going from Texas roofing to America roofing and doing that successfully, communicating that to your new customer base in that new area you're servicing could excite them and could help you get those leads, get those customers. Another benefit to rebranding is reaching a new audience and retargeting yourself for your demographics.
Yeah, I think that updating your branding is a really important part of reaching a new audience because that's all that branding is about, right? Communicating with your audience in the most effective way possible. And if what you're communicating isn't resonating with them, with who you're trying to reach, then you need to update how you're communicating to them. And a really, really great example of that in recent years is Old Spice. They're one of the oldest scent fragrance companies in the United States. And so they kind of have this stereotype as an old man smell, and they weren't reaching new consumers. They weren't expanding their business, and they wanted to see that change. And the way that they did that was to update their messaging from this more traditional, they had the red, white, and blue on the cans, to a more modern packaging. But what was really impactful about their rebrand campaign was just these crazy absurdist ads that they were creating with, they had the centaur guy, and there were weird songs that they were singing, and they went viral online immediately. And within the first month after rebranding, their sales increased by over 100%, shifting the way that they were communicating with their audience and being able to stay relevant to a shifting consumer base.
Yeah, so like you said, that was a really successful campaign, and we've kind of discussed rebranding a lot now, and it can be a very involved and complicated process. A lot of the times it might seem overwhelming for companies. So what tips can we provide to companies who are rebranding on how they can come out stronger from a rebrand? How can they succeed with the rebrand?
I think from a strategic standpoint, it's important, like we've mentioned a few times, to start with those foundational elements and really examining who you are, what you stand for, and who you're trying to reach. And having solid answers to those questions will allow you to start building a more effective strategy.
So like you said, it's important to take into account your mission, values, and whatever it is that you're setting yourself up for. And I think while doing that, it's important to not forget the history of your company, if you have one, just because a lot of the times customers might know you for a certain reason and you don't want to leave them out. You want to take that into account. So if you've been making soaps for a long time, but now you're making shampoo, maybe people will trust you because of your history in soap. My examples are really random, but I hope they help. But yeah, like I said, don't forget about your past. If anything, it can help you communicate to your future audience why they should trust you and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's really important to kind of think about the brand's history and use their past to kind of contextualize where they're going in the future. While we're talking about contextualizing things in the past, I think an important thing to think about when when going forward with a rebrand is thinking forward to the future, not just in terms of how it's going to help expand your business in the future, but how the brand, the life cycle and longevity of the rebrand. How flexible is it going to be, right? If you're rebranding, you don't want to do something that's super on trend, because in 2 or 3 years, you're just going to have to do the whole process again. And that's not ideal. So kind of thinking about how you can create a brand refresh or a brand update that you can work with in the future and maybe tweak parts of, rather than going in and doing that full scale process again.
Yeah, I think these kind of just build up on top of each other, but I think knowing your audience and competitors is also important in this process. With your audience, you want to make sure that you know, are you targeting a new audience and how are you going to appeal to them? Again, like that Old Spice example you gave, they were targeting a newer demographic, so they were having fun with their packaging, their advertising, appealing to younger audiences, I assume. But at the same time, they were probably trying to stand out from their competitors who were probably in a similar situation, because again, their competitors would be people like Gillette and again, historic brands in this industry. And by doing this really fun advertising campaign, they established themselves as like, I guess, modern and exciting, and drew in that new audience while also standing out from their competitors.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Just kind of being different and doing something that's going to catch people's attention. And I think that branding, you should still be aligned, right, with what the rest of the industry is doing. You don't want to swerve too far out of your lane. But it is important to kind of push those boundaries and know how your audience is going to react to that. And sometimes audiences react good to rebrands and sometimes they don't. And then you just return to the drawing board, right? And you think about how you're going to use that to come back better next time and re-strategize something that's stronger and more aligned with what your audience is looking for.
Again, if your rebrand is really involved, like you're updating your logo, your company name, website, well, I guess if you're updating any of those, you kind of have to be consistent when you take your new campaign live. You have to make sure that your social media, your website, LinkedIn, everything across the board is consistent. You don't want to have your outdated logo just on, well, it shouldn't be anywhere, but you would want to make sure that your new logo isn't just on your social media pages. You want to make sure that it's on your website and that the look and feel of your logo matches your website. It's, again, pretty involved if you're going to this scale, but it's about being consistent and thinking about your audience and your customers. If you're updating your logo to something fun and modern, but your website is still from the early 2000s, there's kind of a disconnect there, and you're at risk of losing customers because it might be somewhat misleading to them. So are there any closing thoughts for our listeners, Amie, you have about rebrands that you want to bring up?
Yeah, just that with all of this in mind, no matter how strong your rebranding strategy is, no matter how great your new updated logo is, it doesn't matter if you push all those things to your website and your socials and your packaging if you're not communicating it with your audience, and creating a successful launch strategy to push these new updates into the world. If you take these things and just try and sneak them in there, people are going to notice. And if they've come to expect something from your brand and then all of a sudden there's something different and they don't have an explanation for that, it can kind of feel like you're being tricked or like the rug's being pulled out from under you. And we don't like that, right? So effectively communicating these things is really important. An example of a brand that didn't have a lot of success launching their new updates, in this case a logo, is Gap. They've had the same logo since the inception of the company and updated it to something new, but didn't communicate that with their audience. And they just started pushing out this new logo on assets on their social media. People were not happy. Consumers were communicating that they weren't into it. They received some backlash, and within 6 days, they had returned to their original logo. We have no way of knowing if that would have happened, if they would have communicated it. but they didn't. And it wasted a lot of time and a lot of money on their team's part. So really focusing on not just creating a solid rebrand strategy, but then executing the rebrand strategy as well, I think is a really important thing for businesses to be aware of.
Yeah, that's a really good example of a rebrand that maybe wasn't so successful. I think if we look at like the digital world right now, TikTok, something that I'm obsessed with, a couple years ago, they had a different name. It was...
Musical.ly.
Musical.ly, yes, exactly. It was Musical.ly, and it was just lip syncing songs and little dances. But now it's grown to be everyone's on there. Viral dances, cooking. Everyone is on a different side of TikTok, and it's a really fun app to be on, and a lot of people are on it. Really popular. But again, they went from being lip syncing and dancing to just about everything under the sun. Thank you for being here today, Amie. It was exciting to talk to you about rebrands and all the wonderful examples you provided while I was talking about soap.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
As always, thank you to you, our listener, for listening to our podcast. This was episode 8 of the Versa Creative Podcast. If you would like to ask any questions of me, Amie, or anyone else on our team, you can reach us via our website or email us at info@versacreative.com. We also did a blog on this recently on our website, and that will of course be linked down below if you want to learn more about rebranding. And as always, check us out.